What's the dumbest thing your principal ever enforced? Our principal stood at the entrance each morning, patting us down with a body scanner and confiscating all our phones until the end of day. He'd implemented this last year after he caught someone cheating on a test, and now phones were contraband. Getting caught with one meant give day suspension, plus a negative letter to all your preferred colleges from the guidance counselor. Our principal loved telling us that phones were destroying our generation's ability to focus. But my dad had Parkinson's and used a wheelchair. Mom left us, meaning I was his primary caregiver and needed a way to reach him. Other kids with parents going through health issues couldn't get updates about emergency complications. Students with younger siblings had no way to know if they made it home safe from elementary school. Sean's brother got hospitalized because Sean couldn't warn him their abusive stepdad had found his hidden money last night. We all walked around completely cut off from the people who depended on us. Chris got suspended for trying to sneak his phone past the scanner by wrapping it in foil. Sarah lost her merit scholarship when she ran into the office and retrieved her phone to call her mom about the hospital switching her medication. I spent 7 months without a phone, managing dad by literally running home during both lunch breaks. 25 minutes there, 5 minutes checking on him, 25 minutes back, arriving breathless and sweaty to afternoon classes. Other kids started noticing my routine, and some found it hilarious. Your dad could be having a heart attack right now and you'd never know, Tyler said during chemistry. Bet he's face down on the floor while you're learning about covalent bonds. The worst part was he was right. That's why I decided to game the system. I got myself a cheap burner phone and next morning brought 2 phones through security. The detector inevitably beeped and I surrendered my regular phone before walking on with my second phone tucked. I stashed it behind a loose tile in the 3rd floor bathroom that nobody used. And every morning after that, I'd retrieve it, slip it in my backpack, then put it back in the tile at the end of the day. I only ever used it to check on dad between classes. Everything was going great until Mr. Lee walked into the bathroom while I was texting dad to see if he remembered his heart hills. I dropped the phone and quickly kicked it behind the toilet and doubled over pretending to be sick. Another time, I failed a whole class because of it. I spent 20 minutes silently calming dad down during a panic attack, and by the time I got to English, the exam had already started. Mr. Joe wouldn't let me in and gave me a 0. Still, I had 3 months until graduation, so I figured I could hang on. But dad was getting worse, now forgetting conversations, falling over randomly. Every day alone was a risk, so I paid our neighbor to check on him 3 times per day for $20 a week. I bought a smart home system that sent alerts to my hidden phone. We developed routines, backup plans, prepared for everything, but life doesn't care about preparation. One morning, the old heater dad loved using broke down. He wanted to fix it while I was in school, but the heater was old. The wire would randomly spark. It was a fire hazard. I got him to swear he wouldn't try. I'll wait till you're home, he said with extremely shaky hands. That afternoon, the principal was substituting for our history teacher. He was droning on about the Constitutional Convention when my phone silently vibrated against my ribs. I checked carefully under my desk. Smart home alert. Smoke detected. Master bedroom. Then another. Smoke detected. Hallway. Another. Kitchen. My face went white. Dad had tried to fix the heater. I stood up, my chair scraping. I need to leave. Bathroom emergency. But he didn't even pause his lecture. Sit down. No, I need to go. Your bladder is perfectly. Sit down or you're suspended. The worst thing was not actually the house on fire, but the fact it was 1:15 p.m. You see, dad always took his pain sedatives at 1. They knocked him unconscious for about an hour every time. Right now, he was in his bedroom, in his wheelchair, dead asleep while smoke filled the house. I had to choose between risking college applications or my dad's life. There was no choice. I ran out to call 911. I pressed the phone against my ear, but the line went dead. My call wouldn't go through. I frantically tried again, thinking my shaking fingers had mistyped, but it went dead again. That's when I realized I had no signal. My mind started racing, thinking how this was possible when I just gotten my smart home alert. I clearly had internet. Well, that's when I came to the second realization. The smart home alerts came through because I was connected to school Wi-Fi. I needed signal to call, and the principal had clearly put signal blockers everywhere. And so, I ran. I ran down the hallway, dialing desperately, hoping somewhere had signal. Teachers saw me and started yelling, but I didn't care. I ended up at the front door. Then I turned the handle and realized it was locked. I started sobbing, thinking this dumb rule was about to cost my dad's life. I sprinted down 4 different hallways to the nearest fire exit. The alarm started going off immediately, and I dialed 911. I gave the operator my home address, explained everything, then started sprinting home. I got there 20 minutes later, where I saw dad getting loaded onto an ambulance. The medic said he was alive, but that even 2 more minutes would have culled him. I walked back into school a full week later when my dad was home again. My first period back, the principal stormed into our classroom and pulled me out. He marched me to his office where he sat me down. So you think you're exempt from our 0 phone policy? I sat in the chair across from his massive desk, my hands gripping the armrests until my knuckles went white, and I looked him straight in the eye without blinking. Yes, I think I'm exempt when following your policy would have killed my father. The words came out steady even though my heart was pounding, so hard I could feel it in my throat. His face went from normal pink to deep red in about 2 seconds, and he slammed his hand down on the desk so hard that his coffee mug jumped and spilled brown liquid across some papers. Rules apply to everyone equally, no exceptions. That's what makes them fair. His voice got louder with each word until he was basically yelling at me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the same one that saved my dad's life, and turned the screen toward him. The smoke detector alerts were still there in my notification history, each one timestamped, showing exactly when the fire started spreading through our house. These timestamps show the fire spreading while you refused to let me leave your classroom. My finger pointed at each alert as I scrolled through them slowly so he could see the progression from bedroom to hallway to kitchen. He leaned back in his leather chair, the springs creaking under his weight, and his jaw muscles tightened like he was grinding his teeth together. You had contraband on the school property for months. That's grounds for immediate suspension and college notification. The threat hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I pushed myself up from the chair slowly, feeling something change inside me, like a switch flipping from scared to determined. Then do it. But I'm filing a formal complaint with the district about denied disability accommodations. My legs felt shaky, but I kept standing tall. He actually laughed at this, a harsh barking sound that made me want to punch something. Your father's condition doesn't make you disabled. Nice try, though. He shook his head like I was some stupid kid trying to get out of detention. I took a deep breath and explained what I'd researched the night before, while sitting next to Dad's hospital bed. As his primary caregiver, I qualify for accommodations under federal law, and my dad's doctor will confirm I need emergency contactability for his medical care. The words came out faster than I planned, but I got them all out. The principal waved his hand in the air like he was swatting away a fly, dismissing everything I'd just said. Even if that were true, which it's not, you still violated policy by hiding a phone for months. His fingers drummed on the desk in an annoying rhythm. I turned and walked out of his office without another word, my whole body shaking with anger and fear about what would happen next. The hallway was empty since everyone was still in class, and I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed my dad's neurologist, Dr. Martinez, who'd been treating him for 3 years. She picked up on the 3rd ring and I explained everything in a rush, about the fire and the phone policy, and the principal threatening my college applications. She got quiet for a moment, then said she'd write a letter immediately stating that my caregiving responsibilities required constant availability for medical emergencies. I thanked her about 5 times before hanging up and slumping against the wall, trying to process everything that just happened. The rest of the day went by in a blur of classes where I couldn't focus on anything except wondering if the principal was already typing up suspension paperwork. After the final bell rang, I was shoving books into my locker when Sarah appeared next to me, her face pale and worried. I heard what happened with the principal. This is insane after you literally saved your dad's life. She leaned against the locker next to mine, her voice shaking with anger on my behalf. I told her about the confrontation, about his threats and my counter-threat about filing a complaint, and she listened with her mouth hanging open in disbelief. She grabbed my arm and pulled me to an empty classroom where we could talk without anyone overhearing. I've been keeping track of every time this phone policy hurt someone, she said, pulling out a notebook filled with dates and names and incidents. I have statements from 12 people, including Sean, whose brother ended up in the ICU because he couldn't warn him about their stepdad. There's something really off about a principal who thinks scanning kids like they're criminals every morning is normal behavior. I wonder what's actually driving this obsession with control. It can't just be one cheating incident from last year. That seems like such a small thing to create this whole fortress mentality over. Her handwriting was neat and organized, each incident documented with times and witnesses and outcomes. She showed me page after page of kids who suffered because they couldn't reach their families in emergencies. One girl's grandmother had a stroke and died alone because the girl couldn't answer when the hospital called during school hours. Another kid's little sister got lost walking home from elementary school and wandered around for hours because he couldn't get the call from his mom. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Story after story of the policy causing real harm to real people. Sarah said she'd been planning to take it to the school board but hadn't worked up the courage yet. Now she wanted to combine our cases and fight this together, make them see how dangerous their rules had become. I agreed immediately, feeling less alone knowing someone else understood what we were up against. We spent on the next hour in that empty classroom planning our next moves, writing down every detail we could remember about our experiences, and making copies of all her documentation. That evening after dinner, I sat at my computer Googling fire safety codes for schools and found pages and pages of regulations about emergency exits. The state fire code said all exit doors had to be openable from inside without keys or special knowledge during school hours. I took screenshots of everything, especially the parts about how blocking exits could result in criminal charges if someone got hurt. My hands were shaking as I read about a school in Ohio that got sued after a kid broke his arm trying to escape through a window during a small kitchen fire because the doors were locked. I opened a new document and started typing my complaint to the district's 504 coordinator, explaining how Dad's Parkinson's made me his primary caregiver and how the phone policy almost killed him. I attached the screenshots of the fire codes, the timeline of the smoke alerts, and described how the principal refused to let me leave his classroom, even for a bathroom emergency. I wrote about the signal blockers preventing 911 calls and the locked doors trapping students inside during emergencies. The letter grew to 5 pages as I detailed every safety violation and included links to federal laws about disability accommodations for student caregivers. I stayed up until 3 in the morning rewriting sections to sound less angry and more factual, adding dates and times and specific quotes from the principal about rules applying to everyone equally. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I kept adding evidence, remembering how the paramedics said 2 more minutes would have killed Dad. The next morning I could barely keep my eyes open during first period when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom announcing new security measures starting immediately. Random phone sweeps will be conducted throughout the day with handheld scanners, he said, and I swear I could feel him staring at me through the speaker. Anyone caught with a device faces immediate consequences, including suspension and college notification. Kids started whispering and looking around nervously while teachers stood by the doors holding the new scanning wands they'd been given. During second period, 2 security guards came in and made everyone stand while they swept us with the scanners, checking pockets and backpacks and even making us take off our shoes. 3 kids got caught with phones hidden in calculator cases and got marched out immediately. By lunch, the whole school was paranoid and angry, talking about how this was getting crazy and wondering what had triggered the crackdown. I went to the library during lunch and used the school phone to call the fire department's non-emergency line, explaining I was a student concerned about safety violations at my school. The woman who answered took down all the details about the locked doors and signal blockers, asking specific questions about which exits were affected and whether the blockers prevented all cell service or just certain carriers. She said blocking 911 calls was a serious federal violation and they'd need to investigate immediately. We take these reports very seriously, especially when they involve potential interference with emergency communications, she said, typing rapidly as I gave her more details. She told me an inspector would visit the school within the week and asked for my contact information in case they needed more details. Sarah found me after school with 3 more kids who wanted to help fight the phone policy. One girl named Amy told us her diabetic mother had gone into a coma during school hours and almost died because Amy couldn't answer when the hospital called. Another kid said his little brother got lost for 6 hours because he couldn't get the call from his elementary school. Sarah wrote down all their stories in her notebook, getting contact information and asking if they'd be willing to testify at a school board meeting. We met in the park after school every day that week, gathering more evidence and testimonies from students whose families had been hurt by the policy. I went to the English department office and filed a formal grade appeal for the exam I'd missed while helping Dad during his panic attack. The department chair, a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, listened to my explanation and said she'd need to review the circumstances with Mr. Joe, but that medical emergencies usually warranted makeup opportunities. She made copies of my documentation about Dad's condition and said she'd have an answer within 2 weeks. 3 days after I sent my complaint, I was in chemistry when I got called to the office to check my email on the school computer. There was a message from Georgina Klein at the district office saying she'd reviewed my complaint and was scheduling a formal 504 accommodation meeting. The principal would be required to attend along with relevant staff members to discuss my needs as a student caregiver. She'd attached several forms for Dad's doctor to fill out confirming my caregiving responsibilities and his medical needs. I printed everything and noticed the principal watching me from his office doorway with his arms crossed and jaw clenched tight. 2 days later, I got called out of history class and found both the principal and the guidance counselor waiting in the office. The principal closed the door and sat down across from me while the counselor stood nervously by the window. "We need to discuss your recent complaint to the district," he said, leaning forward with his hands folded on the desk. "Withdrawing it would be better for everyone involved, especially considering your college applications are still pending." The guidance counselor quickly added that they were just concerned about my stress levels and wanted to help me focus on graduation, but I could see the principal's face getting redder as he waited for my response. I pulled out my phone from my pocket and hit the record button on the voice memo app, setting it face up on the desk between us. "Are you threatening to sabotage my college applications if I don't drop my complaint?" The guidance counselor jumped in immediately, her hands waving leaving as she explained they were just worried about my stress levels with everything going on at home. The principal's face turned even darker red, and his knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of his desk. His jaw muscles twitched as he stared at my recording phone, like he wanted to grab it and throw it across the room. The counselor kept talking faster about support services and counseling options while shooting nervous glances between me and the principal. I picked up my phone and saved the recording with the date and time, then stood up and walked out while they were still talking. The next morning I was in chemistry when someone knocked on the classroom door, and a man in a fire department uniform walked in carrying a clipboard and equipment bag. Alfred Coffey introduced himself to our teacher and explained he needed to inspect the building's safety systems, including emergency communication capabilities. He pulled out a yellow device about the size of a phone and started walking around the room holding it up at different heights. The numbers on its screen kept changing as he moved closer to the windows and then back toward the hallway. He wrote notes on his clipboard after each measurement, and his forehead creased deeper with each reading. I watched from my seat as he tested near the door, and the device showed 0 bars just like my phone had during the fire. He asked our teacher about the nearest fire exit and whether students could make emergency calls from this location. She looked confused and said she assumed they could but had never tried since phones weren't allowed. Alfred made more notes and moved to test the hallway while we all watched through the door window. He held his device at different spots along the corridor and kept shaking his head at whatever the readings showed. Other students started whispering about what was happening and whether this had to do with my dad's fire. Alfred spent 20 minutes just in our hallway, checking every classroom door and testing signals at various points. He tried his own cell phone in multiple spots, and I could see him getting more frustrated when calls wouldn't connect. He pulled out a second device that looked like a radio and tested that too, making notes about which frequencies worked and which didn't. During passing period, my phone buzzed with Dad calling, his voice shaky and confused on the other end. When do I take the blue pills? The bottle says morning, but I thought it was afternoon. I explained his medication schedule while walking to my next class, grateful I could actually answer instead of finding out hours later that he doubled his dose or skipped it entirely. He asked the same question again 2 minutes later, not remembering we just talked, so I stayed on while he took the right pills and put the bottles back in order. Why does the principal keep making things worse for himself by adding more extreme rules after every incident? His reaction to one student complaint is to crack down on the entire school with random sweeps and suspension threats. My neighbor texted right after I hung up, sending a photo of Dad on the floor next to his wheelchair, with the message that he'd tried to transfer himself and fallen but wasn't hurt. She helped him back up, but mentioned this was the 3rd fall this week, and the care was getting more intensive than our original agreement covered. She asked for an extra $15 per week, which seemed reasonable given how much more she was doing, but I knew our budget was already stretched past breaking. I did the math on my phone calculator, adding up Dad's medications, the mortgage payment, utilities, groceries, and the current neighbor payment. Adding $15 more meant I'd have to skip lunch every day, and probably some dinners too, but there wasn't really a choice since Dad needed the help. I texted back agreeing to the increase and thanking her for everything she was doing. My stomach was already growling from skipping breakfast to save money, and now I'd be doing that permanently, but at least Dad would have someone checking on him more often. That afternoon, the whole school was buzzing about Alfred Coffey calling a meeting with the principal about his inspection findings. Kids who worked in the office said they heard him on the phone with someone at the fire department using words like violation and immediate correction required. The principal had been pacing in his office all afternoon, according to the secretary who brought him coffee. Word spread that Alfred found problems with the locked doors, the signal blockers, and several other safety issues that needed fixing right away. The meeting happened the next morning in the principal's office with the door closed, but everyone in the main office could hear Alfred's firm voice through the walls. He explained that blocking cell signals prevented emergency calls, which violated federal regulations about 911 access. He also said the locked door policy during school hours created an illegal fire hazard that could trap students during an emergency. The principal's voice got louder as he argued that signal blockers were essential for maintaining academic integrity and preventing cheating. Alfred cut him off to say that education meant nothing if students died because they couldn't call for help during an emergency. He referenced my dad's fire specifically, noting that the 2-minute delay from blocked signals nearly cost a life. The principal tried arguing that it was an isolated incident, but Alfred had a whole list of other near misses and safety concerns from his inspection. He gave the school 48 hours to disable all signal blockers or face immediate fines and potential closure by the fire marshal's office. The principal kept trying to negotiate for exceptions or gradual changes, but Alfred wouldn't budge on the timeline. Students gathering outside could hear papers rustling as Alfred presented his formal report with all the violations documented and photographed. Sarah found me after school that same day, holding a stack of papers and looking determined. She'd been collecting stories from other students hurt by the phone policy and wanted to organize us into a support group. We met in the empty chemistry lab where 17 kids showed up with their own horror stories about the policy. Sarah handed out sheets for everyone to write down exactly what happened to them and how the phone ban had caused real harm. Kids wrote about missed family emergencies, lost scholarships, and dangerous situations they couldn't escape from. One girl couldn't call her mom when she got trapped in the gym storage room for 3 hours. Another kid missed his dad's last phone call before emergency surgery. Sarah collected all the statements and said she'd type them up for the district meeting about my accommodation request. The next morning, I got called to the guidance office where the English department chair was waiting with my grade appeal paperwork. She asked me to explain exactly why I missed Mr. Joe's exam, and I told her about Dad's panic attack that day. She took notes while I described the 20 minutes I spent on the phone keeping him calm and safe. Then she called Mr. Joe down to explain his no makeup policy for missed exams. He walked in looking annoyed and said his syllabus was clear about no exceptions for any reason. The department chair pointed to the section about medical emergencies and asked if that included family medical crises. Mr. Joe said students could claim anything was an emergency to get out of tests. She reminded him that I had documentation from Dad's doctor about his condition and my caregiver status. He still insisted that being late meant automatic failure according to his rules. The department chair said she'd review the policy and get back to both of us within a week. 2 weeks crawled by with no word about my 504 meeting until finally I got an email from Georgina Klein. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in the conference room next to the principal's office. I spent the night before organizing all of Dad's medical records and doctor letters into a folder. Sarah helped me practice what to say and reminded me to stay calm even if the principal got difficult. Thursday arrived, and I walked into the conference room to find Georgina already there with a laptop and recorder. The principal sat across from her with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Georgina introduced herself as the district's 504 coordinator and explained she was here to determine if I qualified for accommodations. I opened my folder and spread out Dad's diagnosis papers, his neurologist letter, and photos from the fire damage. Georgina picked up each document and read carefully while typing notes on her laptop. I explained how Dad needed constant monitoring because of his falls and medication schedule. The principal interrupted to say I'd been hiding a phone for months, which showed clear defiance. Georgina raised her hand to stop him and asked me to continue explaining the fire incident. I described the smoke alerts, the locked doors, the blocked signals, and finding Dad barely breathing. She asked specific questions about response times and what would have happened without my hidden phone. The principal kept shifting in his chair and tapping his pen against the table. Sarah came in next with Sean and two other students who wanted to testify about the policy. Sean's voice shook as he described his brother's hospitalization after their stepdad's attack. He explained how his brother nearly died because Sean couldn't warn him to stay away from home. The girl who got trapped in the storage room showed photos of the bruises from trying to break down the door. Another student talked about missing his mom's stroke because the school took his phone that morning. Georgina took detailed notes about each incident and asked follow-up questions about timing and outcomes. The principal argued that these were isolated incidents that didn't represent normal circumstances. Georgina looked at him and said that emergency situations were exactly when students needed phone access most. She proposed a trial accommodation, allowing me to carry my phone for medical emergencies only. The principal's face turned red as he insisted this would destroy his entire discipline system. Other students would demand the same exception, and soon everyone would have phones again. Georgina reminded him that 504 accommodations were legally required for students with documented needs. The principal said he needed time to think of alternatives that wouldn't undermine his authority. Right then, Alfred Coffey knocked and entered the room carrying his inspection report. He placed copies in front of everyone and started reading his safety findings out loud. The signal blockers violated federal law by preventing 911 calls during emergencies. The locked door policy created illegal entrapment that could trap students during fires or other disasters. He stated the school must immediately disable all signal blocking equipment or face federal penalties. The principal argued that he needed time to find other ways to prevent cheating and distractions. Alfred said safety regulations didn't allow for transition periods when lives were at risk. Georgina looked at both reports and said the principal had 1 week to propose policy changes, but my accommodation would start immediately given the documented medical necessity and safety concerns. As we stood to leave, the principal grabbed my arm and pulled me aside. He warned that any non-emergency use of my phone would result in immediate suspension. I agreed to keep a detailed log of every call and text related to Dad's care. The English department chair caught me in the hallway and offered a compromise on my failed exam. I could take a makeup version for 70% credit maximum, which wouldn't save my grade completely, but it would keep me from failing the whole class and ruining my graduation chances. Dad's neurologist called that evening and said she'd been thinking about the fire. She wanted to move his sedative schedule to avoid that dangerous 1 p.m. window during school hours. We shifted everything to 3:30 instead, which wasn't perfect since his pain got worse by afternoon, but at least he'd stay awake if something bad happened while I was stuck in class. 2 days later, I got an email from someone named Teresa Compton at the school board. She needed all my documentation about the fire incident for her review of emergency protocols. I printed everything including the smoke detector alerts, the 911 transcript, and the fire department report showing response times. She scheduled a meeting with me for the following Tuesday to go over the timeline in person. Meanwhile, the principal went into overdrive with his phone monitoring after losing the signal blocker fight. Teachers started patrolling hallways between every class period, carrying handheld scanners to sweep for devices. They'd stop random kids and wave the wands around their backpacks looking for hidden phones. I find it curious how the principal grabbed the student's arm and made threats right after losing the legal battle. That physical contact feels like crossing another line he shouldn't cross. But when they tried scanning me, I held up my 504 accommodation letter from Georgina. The teacher had to back off even though I could see the frustration in his eyes. Other kids weren't so lucky, and 3 got caught with phones that first week alone. The principal made them stand in the cafeteria during lunch, holding signs that said, "I endangered everyone." A week after the patrols started, the school finally installed those emergency phone zones Alfred had demanded. They put special landlines in 3 spots that connected directly to 911 without going through the office. Small green signs marked each zone with instructions for when phone use was allowed during emergencies. It felt like a tiny victory, even though we shouldn't have needed a fire to get basic safety measures. That same afternoon, I got called to the office where the principal sat with a thick folder. He'd filed formal disciplinary charges for my months of hiding the burner phone before the fire. The paperwork went back through security footage, showing me going to that 3rd floor bathroom every morning. He wanted retroactive suspension that would go on my permanent record and get reported to colleges. I immediately called Georgina, who said this would need a full hearing with due process rights. She couldn't believe he was pushing this after everything that happened with Dad's fire. The hearing got scheduled for 2 weeks out, with a panel of 3 district administrators. I spent those weeks gathering every piece of evidence about why I'd needed that hidden phone. Sarah helped me organize witness statements from other students affected by the phone policy. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the district office conference room with a binder of documents. The panel included Teresa Compton, who I'd already met about the fire investigation. She looked at the principal with an expression I couldn't quite read as we all sat down. I started presenting my timeline, showing exactly when Dad's fire emergency happened minute by minute. The smoke alerts at 1:15. The principal refusing to let me leave. The blocked 911 calls. Teresa interrupted to ask the principal why he denied a student claiming a bathroom emergency. He said students lie about bathroom needs to skip class all the time. She wrote something in her notebook and told me to continue with my evidence. I showed Dad's medical records, his medication schedule, and the neighbor's statement about his care needs. Then Alfred Coffey entered the room carrying his official fire marshal report from the inspection. He took the witness chair and opened his folder of safety violations from our school. He stated clearly that without my 911 call, the fire would have been fatal within minutes. The smoke inhalation alone would have killed Dad in his unconscious state from the sedatives. He emphasized how the phone policy created an unconscionable safety risk for the whole school community. The principal tried arguing that rules need consistent enforcement, but Alfred cut him off. He said no policy is worth a human life, and blocking emergency calls violated federal law. The panel members huddled together for 20 minutes while we all sat in tense silence. When they came back, the lead administrator read their decision into the record. They found that while I had technically violated the phone policy, the circumstances completely warranted my actions. They issued a symbolic 1-day suspension that I'd already served by missing school during Dad's recovery. Most importantly, they ruled this wouldn't appear on my college applications or permanent academic record. The principal's face turned dark red, but he couldn't argue with the panel's unanimous decision. Within a week, the district sent out new requirements for all administrators district-wide. They had to complete 40 hours of training on disability accommodations and emergency protocols. The principal got assigned extra sessions on recognizing legitimate medical emergencies versus normal student excuses. I heard he complained to anyone who'd listen about government overreach destroying school discipline, but other principals in the district actually thanked the trainers for clarifying confusing regulations. That same week, Sarah went to her own hearing about the merit scholarship she'd lost. She brought documentation showing her mom's emergency hospitalization and the medication mix-up that could have been fatal. The scholarship committee reviewed her case and agreed the circumstances justified her retrieving her phone. They restored partial funding for her last semester, though not the full amount she'd originally won. won. She cried when she got the letter because even partial help meant she could still afford books. We celebrated with cheap pizza, both of us exhausted from fighting the system for basic fairness. The next week, I sat in an empty classroom taking the makeup English exam Mr. Joe had finally agreed to give me. My hands shook a little as I wrote the essay portion because this test would decide if I could graduate on time. The department chair sat at the front desk grading papers while I worked, occasionally glancing up to check the time. I finished with 10 minutes to spare and handed her my test booklet. She said she'd have it graded by Monday, and I'd know my final grade then. That weekend, I helped Dad practice his new physical therapy exercises the doctor recommended to reduce his falls. We set up grab bars in every hallway and moved his favorite chair closer to the bathroom. The neighbor came by 3 times like usual, but now she had a checklist we'd made together of things to watch for. Monday morning, the department chair called me to her office and showed me my test score, 72%, which brought my final grade to a C-. Not great, but enough to pass and keep my graduation on track. She handed me the official grade change form and told me to take it to the registrar's office immediately. I practically ran there and watched the woman behind the desk update my transcript in the computer system. 2 days later, the principal stopped doing his morning body scanner routine at the entrance. Instead, a security guard just stood there watching students come in without searching anyone. I heard from other kids that parents had been calling the school board nonstop after my dad's fire incident made the local news. The board told the principal he couldn't search students anymore without specific reasonable suspicion of wrongdoing. He still collected phones if he saw them, but couldn't pat us down looking for them. Dad and I spent that evening adjusting his medication schedule with his neurologist on speakerphone. We moved his sedatives from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. when I'd definitely be home to watch him. The doctor also prescribed a different pain medication that wouldn't knock him out completely. Within 2 weeks, Dad's falls dropped from daily to maybe twice a week. Our emergency alert system actually worked now that I could carry my phone openly. The neighbors started texting me updates throughout the day about how Dad was doing. I could focus better in class knowing I'd get a message if anything went wrong. 3 months passed in this new routine, and college acceptance letters started arriving. I got rejected from my reach schools, but the state university sent me an acceptance packet with a small financial aid offer. It wasn't my dream school, but it was affordable and only 2 hours from home, so I could visit Dad on weekends. The same week, the school installed new signs by every exit explaining the updated emergency phone policy. Students could now use phones to call for help in medical emergencies, family crises, or safety situations without punishment. Kids actually started feeling safer, knowing they could reach their parents if something bad happened. More acceptance letters came for other students too, and Sarah got into her top choice with enough aid to cover most costs. We compared financial aid packages in the cafeteria, helping each other figure out which offers were actually good deals. Graduation day arrived faster than expected, and I stood in line waiting to walk across the stage. My phone hung from an official medical accommodation lanyard around my neck, completely legal and visible. When they called my name, I walked up to get my diploma from the principal. He held it out with a bare minimum handshake, his jaw tight, not making eye contact. I took the diploma and walked off stage where Dad was waiting in his wheelchair with the biggest smile I'd seen in months. Sarah gave the valedictorian speech next, talking about how our class had learned that standing up for what's right matters more than following unfair rules. She mentioned the importance of advocating for ourselves and others who need help. The principal sat on stage with his arms crossed and face completely blank while parents stood up clapping for her. After the ceremony, we took pictures outside, and Dad kept telling everyone how proud he was. The neighbor who'd been helping us came to watch and brought home cookies to celebrate. Other kids and their families stopped to thank me for fighting the phone policy, since it had helped them too. That summer, I worked at a grocery store saving money for college while setting up Dad's new care system. We hired a professional aide for weekdays using Dad's disability benefits we finally got approved. The aide had medical training and could handle Dad's medications and physical therapy. I trained her on all of Dad's specific needs and preferences over 2 weeks. She learned his favorite TV shows, how he liked his sandwiches made, which exercises hurt his joints too much. By August, I felt confident leaving for college, knowing Dad had proper care. The aide had my number and we set up daily video calls so I could check in. Dad even started using a tablet to message me throughout the day with the aide's help. Move-in day at the state university felt surreal after everything that had happened senior year. Principals doing the bare minimum handshake at graduation without eye contact? That's someone who knows they were wrong but can't admit it, just going through the motions now that their power's been taken away. My roommate asked about the medical lanyard I still wore with my phone, and I explained the whole story. He couldn't believe a principal had actually blocked emergency calls and said his high school just had a phone basket in each classroom. I'm studying to become a special education teacher now because I want to help kids who have family situations like mine. Sometimes fighting an unfair system costs you grades and stress and sleepless nights, but when it's about saving someone's life or protecting kids who need help, every single battle is worth it. Alright, that's all from me today. Thanks for letting me wonder about things with you. I hope it was fun having a curious mind along for the ride. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.